Hi, I'm Greg from ZE Partner. Today's video is a follow-on to our previous video about adding a products subform to the deals module in Zoho CRM. If you haven't seen that video yet, please watch that video first and then come back to this video. There's a card above me with a link to the first video in this series. Start there and then follow on. As a reminder, the purpose of this series is to be able to add products or services to a subform on your deal in Zoho CRM. Then to either click a button or via a workflow rule or blueprint, automatically create a quote document inside Zoho CRM. Once the quote has been accepted, we will then have another video on converting that quote into an invoice in Zoho Books. In today's video, we'll be doing the middle part of creating the quote document from the products and services subform on the deal. Let's jump straight in. Here I am inside my deal record. This is a different system to the one I recorded the first video in, and you'll notice there's some differences here because I've got my ZE portal extension installed on the system, but I've added the same products and services subform like we learned how to do in the previous video. So today we want to take this information and turn it into a quote automatically. So we can manually make a quote by clicking the plus symbol there, but then you'll see nothing follows through into here. We want to create a function that automatically pulls that information across for us. So let's cancel out of here and let's go into the setup and into functions. And we're going to create a new function, and we're just going to call this ZE create quote from deal. Okay. And we're going to set this as a standalone function so we can reuse it in multiple places in the system. So now we want to get our deal ID in as our argument, and we will say that that's an integer. Save. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our deal record. So we say deal record equals zoho.crm.getRecordById. The module is deals, and the deal ID comes from our arguments up here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get our subform. So to do that, let's open a new tab and go back to setup and click on APIs. Go to API names and go to deals. Now here we can see that our subform is called products and services. Instead of using that, we want to look in here, and we can see here that we've got a subform and the API name is products and services. So we're going to copy that here, and we're going to say products and services equals deal record dot get JSON, and then paste in our API name. Now, if we just info that out and go save and execute, and then copy our ID from our deal and paste that in there, we can now see our products and services are listed here as a JSON object. Or in Deluge, it would be called a map, and in some programming languages, it would be called an array. So this is a whole list of items. So instead of getting all the items in one go like this, instead what we'll do is we'll say if products and services is not equal to null, in other words, it's not empty, then we want to say for each product or service in products and services, info the product or service. And then here we'll just info a line underneath it so we know where they separate. So let's save and execute again. We'll paste in our ID and save. There we go. So this is each of our products. And here we can see that we've got our product total, we've got our description, we've got our product name. That's really important because, as you can see, this is actually a mini record, which includes the name and the ID of our product. And we've got our quantity and we've got our unit price. So now I'm going to paste in some code I've already written. And these are the fields we need to fill our quote with. Now you'll see this product details. This wants a list of products and services, which we will build here in this for each loop, where we go through each of the products and services linked to our deal. So right at the top, I'm going to put in a new list here, and I'm going to call this products list. Actually, to make it easier, let's call it quote products list. and we'll say equals list. And now what we'll do is in our products and services, we'll take this away and we'll say here that the product mini record equals product and service dot get JSON. And then here we want our product name. And then what we want to say is if product mini record is not equal to null, in other words, there is something in that field, then the product ID equals the product mini record dot get JSON ID. All right. Now we'll stay inside this if statement because if we don't have a product on our subform, we don't want to add an empty row to the quote. The next thing we want to do is get the description. Now there are two ways to do this. So the first way, we'll get the description from the subform on the deal from here. So if you have made some changes to this, they will feed through to the quote. That's the way we're going to do it today. The other way to do it is to pull in the description from the product item, the actual record of the product. So no matter what you or your team write in this box, it'll always default to the actual product description if you were on the product record. But that's more of a unique case if you want to stop your team from being able to change the description. But we'll leave it as using the description from the subform for today. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a product map. So we'll go product map equals map. And then here we'll go product map dot put. And the first thing is the product. And then here we will put the product ID. So the next thing we want to put is our product description. So the same product map dot put. And then here product description. And then here, we're going to do a little statement that is if null with two brackets around it. And then we'll put here product or service dot get JSON. And then here, I think it's just called description with a capital D. Yes, it is. So if it's not null, it'll do that. Otherwise, it'll just put that in. All right. Let me explain this just to make sure it's clear. In the value for the key product description inside the product map, which will go inside our quotes products list, which will go here. Let's do that while we're there. We are saying if the value of the description on our deal subform row is null, in other words, it's empty, then just put a blank string in. Otherwise, put the value from that field in here. And the reason we do that is otherwise it would populate our quote with the word null. And we don't want that, obviously. Now we're going to copy this because we're going to need this a few times. So the next thing is we need our quantity. So we'll take our quantity here. And then we need to get our quantity from our subform row, which is the same, but just with a capital. And in this case, because we don't want 0 items being listed on our quote. So here we'll say if the product quantity equals 0 or product quantity equals null, then we want our product quantity to be equal to 1. So we're always going to default to 1. Else, our product quantity is going to equal the product quantity. And now we'll take the product quantity figure and we'll put that there. So that ensures, I'll put some notes here to help you guys follow along. Set product quantity to 1 if empty or 0. Okay, so after the quantity, we need the unit price. You can do the same for the unit price if you want to, where you default it to a specific figure, or at least you have some sort of warning that comes up if the figure is 0. But in our case, we're not going to bother with that. We're going to change this actually to the list price, and that's all we're going to add for now. So now that we've created our map, we want to put or add the quote product map. to the quote products list. So here we go, quote products list dot add product map. And that just means that we'll have a list of items that we'll put under product details. So now the subject, you can name this whatever you like. In our case, we're just going to do this as the deal name. We're going to create some variables instead. So here we'll call this deal name. And here we'll say deal name equals that. And then let's go for the contact mini record equals deal record dot get JSON contact name. If contact mini record is not null, then contact ID equals contact mini record dot get JSON ID. So we want to do the same now for the account. So let's just copy all of this. And here we'll change this to account and account and account. There we go, great, perfect. So deal name here, it actually wants the deal ID. So don't be fooled by that. So we'll put deal ID there, we'll put contact ID here, and we'll put account ID here. Perfect. Now it wants a description for our quote. So you can either have a field on your deal that explains what the quote description is, or you can leave the description blank, or you can use the description from your deal. So let's see here. I'm using my description for my deal for something else in this case. If you want to make this reusable, you can always add the quote description as an additional parameter, like that. Set it to string, and then here we can have quote description. We'll keep that enabled so you can see how that works. All right, so next we want to create the quote record, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on here that we want this to trigger workflows, but it's just singular, workflow, blueprint, and approval. And what that means is if we have any workflow rules or blueprints or approvals running on our quotes module, when we create this new one, we want to trigger each of those things. So they sort of wake up and they know that something happened. It basically treats this background action of creating a quote, it treats it the same as if a human had done this action on the system. All right, so here we info out the quote response. And then next we get the quote ID or the record ID for the quote from the response. But you see, this is quite dangerous just to try to get the ID from there because we don't actually know it was successful yet. So first we want to say if the create quote response is not equal to null, then we want to say if the create quote response dot contains key, and here we want to say ID equals true, then we know that we have successfully created the quote. So we'll info quote successfully created. And now we're safe to get our quote record ID from the record. We can now say at the bottom, if quote record ID equals null, then we want to info error creating quote. Okay, so now what we want to do is we also want to check before we try to create the quote, we want to check that we have some products. So we'll put another if statement up here and we'll paste in our list and we'll say is empty equals true. Then we want to say info error no products, else products found, and then we want to do this stuff. All right. So now you'll see that I'm just infoing out what's happening. And that's not very helpful because this script will be running in the background. So what we actually want to do is we want to return this information to us. So what I'm going to do is right at the top, I'm going to create a return map. And I'm going to create an error map. Now, you'll recognize this from my extension for error logging. So this is the sort of go-to that I use whenever I'm creating scripts. If I run into any problems, I put the problem in my error map. And then right at the end of the script, I check if there's anything in my error map. And if there is, then I report the error map back. Else, I report the return map back. And I can log the return map as a successful run on my function, or I can report that there was an error with my error map. So in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to go down to our first one here, and we're going to change the, well, actually, we'll just put it below. We'll say error map dot put error. Well, actually, we don't even need error. No products found. And then here we'll just put our quote products list, even though that will be empty. All right, and now we can check our next one here. So this one we want to put in our return map, but actually we'll do it below return map dot put, and I'm just going to call this success and success, and then I'm going to say return map dot put, and then here I want my quote record ID and quote record ID, and then that way we can just look for can we find success? Yes, well then let's get our quote record ID, and otherwise we want the error map put, and we'll say no quote record ID found. And then here, instead of this, actually, let's put the create quote response so we can see why it failed. And then here, what we'll do is before our return statement, we'll say if error map dot is empty equals false, that means we found an error because it's not empty. Is empty equals false means it's not empty. So error, and then we'll say return map dot put errors, comma error map, and then here we'll say return map. And this should now work perfectly. So let's give it a test and see. All right, it doesn't like account mini record. Why doesn't it like account mini record? Here we've got account mini record. Oh, because we never created the account mini record, of course. So let's do that quickly. So this is account name. Well done to anyone who spotted that ahead of time. All right, let's save and execute. Great. So we're just going to copy our ID of our record again, paste it in there. And here we will say quote description goes here. Save. Awesome. Our quote has been successfully created. So let's go over to our deal and reload. And there's our quote. Awesome. So let's open it up and see if there's anything else we want to change. So we've got a quote stage, which we can change if we want to. We can put this in as something. So for example, we might want to put it down as delivered immediately. We have got our valid until date if we want to use that. We can see here that there are some fields for team and carrier. All this information has been pulled through automatically, which is really nice. And here we have not brought through these fields automatically. We can go back to our API names and change this to quotes. And then here we can see we've got our billing city, billing code, billing country, billing state, billing street. So these are the things we want to put into our quote. So down here, what we'll do is we'll say create quote map dot put, and then we'll say billing street. Actually, do you know what? This is a bit more efficient. So we're going to get that information from our account. So instead of putting our create quote map here, we're going to put it right at the top. And then where we find our account, and we see we've got our account ID here, we'll say account record equals zoho.crm.get records by ID, accounts, account ID. And here what we want to do is we want to say that the dot put billing street, and here this will be the account record dot get JSON and we want to get the API names from our account. They'll hopefully be the same. Yes, they look exactly the same. Brilliant. So what we'll do here is we'll say billing street. And remember, we're going to put this in a if null or is null. No, if null. So if null. There we go. And that will just ensure that if the billing street is empty, it'll just put a blank value instead of the word null. So we'll do that for each of the address parameters. So we've got billing street, billing city, and we've got billing state comes next. It doesn't actually matter what order you put these in. I just like to put them in the right order so it doesn't confuse me later. So state, then normally code, and then finally country. And country. There we go. All right, so that will now add the address if there is an account found. If there's no account found, it obviously can't add the address. Perfect. You could do the same for shipping if you wanted to, just change billing to shipping, but it's the exact same process. All right, so let's put in a quote stage. So if we go back to our quote, and we're going to put our quote stage down as delivered, because we're making this quote through an automation. So one of the steps might be to actually email the quote to the customer. So let's go back here and look up quote stage. Okay, so it's called quote stage. So we go back to our script and we'll put it in here. Say create quote map dot put quote stage delivered. All right, so let's delete this quote. And then we'll go back to our deal and let's create another one. Perfect. And then if we go here and reload, we can see our quote is in the stage of delivered. And we can see that it's pulled in our address as we were expecting, pulled in all of our items, and we can also add terms and conditions if we wanted to, but you get the concept. All you do is you find the API name of which field you want to fill in on the quote, and you add it to this create quote map, put the API name there, and put whatever value you want to go in there. The hard part is really just preparing and putting the products in, but that's being shown already. Now that we have our standalone function, let me show you how we can actually automate the process. So we're saving our function, and now we're going to go into blueprints, because that's what I like to do, and we're going to go onto our deal. Here we've got send quote, and during, I'm just going to put a message, all right? And here we can give them the description to make sure they're aware. And here we'll say we want to run a custom action, and our custom action is going to be a new one that we write, and this will be called ZEBP for blueprint, create deal quote. And we'll copy that. And then this is very easy. Here we want to, actually, let's first do this. Let's go response equals, and we just want to get the name of our standalone function, which we named ZE underscore create underscore quote underscore from underscore deal. So here we want to write the word standalone dot, and then here we need to feed it the deal ID and the description. And actually, we're going to call this the quote description, just so we don't get confused. There we go. And we want to put a semicolon on the end. We'll copy our quote description. And so key number 1 is the deal ID. And we want to look that up from the deals module, deal ID, done. The next one is our quote description. And we're going to use our deal description for this one. save, save. All right. And now we want to republish the blueprint. We want to go back here. Let's delete our quote. So we'll delete this. And then in our deal, we want to now go send quote. Here we will say a quote for testing purposes, and we'll click save. And now if we refresh, we can see that our quote has been automatically created. And if we look for our description, it says here a quote for testing purposes. So it's come through from that blueprint action, which is really cool. So that's it for today's video. In our next video, we'll learn how to automatically create an invoice on Zoho Books from this quote once the customer has confirmed they want to go ahead with the quote. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and please subscribe. Make sure you like the video as well. Thanks a lot.